Hello, everyone, and welcome to another PropMoto live webinar. As always, I will lead this webinar. My name is Franco. I'm the co-founder and editor of PropMoto. And today we're going to be talking about office occupancy trends. As the editor of a publication, I get to see certain terminology rise and fall. And one of those terms that I have seen rise and I think now is pretty much gone is this idea of like post-pandemic office. After the pandemic was coming to a close, we talked a lot about, oh, we're still kind of in this limbo. We don't really know what it's going to look like. And I personally have not edited or seen that word in quite a bit. I'm quite happy to say that. And I think it's because we really have kind of hit a stasis. I think everybody in the office industry isn't thinking, oh, where are we going to land? I think they're already looking at it and said, we're there. At this point, we just need to adjust our offices and our workplaces to better probably reflect what we then called the post-pandemic reality. So today we're going to be talking about all kind of detailed issues when it comes to office, how to understand occupancy, how to understand what people want from the office. Just really, really getting into it with some of our experts here today. As always, I will remind you that this is live. There is a chat feature here, and I know that there are lots of experts that we saw signed up for this. So we're interested to hear what you all have to say too. So please don't be shy, jump in, ask questions, use the chat feature. Right off the bat, I would like to get things started with a bit of a question for the audience. We preparing for this, we're talking about all of the different ways that occupancy can be understood and the differences, but we kind of wanted to understand from the people watching, how you are actually tracking occupancy. So if you have a second, why don't you jump on the chat here and just throw out what kind of occupancy data that you use mostly, that you rely on mostly, right? Be it access control, sensors, surveys, just ancillary, asking around. Always interested to hear what people are using, and I think that might help us, going forward to understand, what to talk about and where to lead the conversation. So, without any further ado, I will introduce all of our awesome experts here. First, we have Nick Halverson. He's CEO and co-founder of Occuspace. That's an occupancy monitoring platform. Hi, Nick.
Hey, Franco, thanks for having me and setting this up.
Of course, yeah. Next, we have Jeff Gagnon. He's head of workplace at Rise Commercial Real Estate. Thanks for joining us, Jeff.
Hey, Franco. Thanks for having me.
No problem. Yeah. Next, we have Bernie Mell. He's a CEO and co-founder at Kissy. They're an access control provider. Hi, Bernie.
Hello, nice to be here.
Yeah, great to have you. And last but not least, we have returning for, I think this is your third now, right, Mahesh, webinar with us. It's Mahesh Vinyasagar. He's Vice President of Enterprise Real Estate at the global staffing firm Robert Half.
Hey, Franco, I appreciate you having me on, so thank you so much.
Yeah, of course. So, I think before we jump into some of the, stuff we're going to talk about how to actually, do some of these better practices of understanding workplaces and workplace occupancy, I'd love to just kind of set the state of the market a little bit, right? See what you guys are seeing. Obviously, you all have kind of different views of what's going on, and maybe avoiding the idea of the post pandemic, right? Of just what do you think the state of office real estate is? What are some of the larger trends, and particularly when that comes to occupancy, right? How are people really trying to better understand what's going on inside of these workplaces to hopefully make them better for everyone that works there. Jeff, you and I had a conversation before this that I thought was great. So, maybe you can start off with just like what you guys are doing, right? I know you guys do quite a bit of consulting. You also build out your own kind of tech tools to help understand offices. But what are some of the kind of bigger picture things that you're seeing when you're working with clients?
Yeah, so a lot of our clients are thinking about things like cost per visit. So, integral to understanding that is occupancy, attendance, utilization. And our clients, depending on their size, their scale from an IT perspective, go about doing that a bunch of different ways. Some of them are kind of more homegrown solutions where they're looking at Wi-Fi data. other organizations, maybe sometimes they're a little bit more mature. You know, they're installing sensors to help them understand what utilization across different space types looks like. And then we put that together with the cost side of the equation on the portfolio side, put that together with lease data, OpEx, to help them understand, you know, cost per visit, for example, you know, what they're paying to create space or have space for employees when they come in. But more generally, kind of zooming back out, like I think our clients kind of fall into one of two or three categories. There's, you know, the hybrid firms that don't have a firm mandate in place, in which case we're seeing, and I know Bernie and Nick can talk to this in more detail, but we're seeing somewhere between like, you know, sub 30% attendance rates for those firms that you know have a hybrid policy, but they don't have a firm like mandate around it. And then there's the hybrid firms that have a mandate, and we're seeing above 30% attendance, and it really kind of swings wildly depending on the programs that the clients have in place. Are they doing food service, and what days of the week are they requiring people to come in? Those things tend to swing the numbers a lot, but it's greater than 30% up to maybe 60%. 60% from my perspective, where I sit with our clients, is really high attendance right now with mandated attendance policies. And then there's the back in office, and even the back in office firms that we work with, the attendance rates are getting better, but they're not pre-pandemic attendance rates yet. They still fall well short of attendance levels that we saw before the pandemic.
Yeah, I think that's what we're hearing, you know, echoed by a lot of the interviews we get and the people we talk to. And I certainly, think we're kind of hitting a stasis now with that. Bernie, I'm interested to hear from you. Obviously, you know, with the access control, I see lots of people saying they're using badge data, right, as like a pretty kind of fundamental piece of understanding occupancy. You know, what are you seeing as far as trends and how occupiers and landlords are kind of going about understanding, you know, occupancy and the need for the workplace?
Yeah, I think first of all, I think there's a overall cost pressure on the occupancy data point. So let's get occupancy up already, and let's get back as many people as possible. And the workforce typically say, well, what do we have from it? So I think typically companies try to rally around, like, let's do more on-site meetups where we have benefits of like collaborating 2 or 3 days together. And batch data can basically help because it's personal identifiable. So you can analyze how many teams were at least on site once a month or something like that. And you can analyze how many events happened on site. Doesn't need to be how many percent were 3 days a week on site. So I think there's more creative ways to measure performance-based occupancy. And we've seen, we have an index on occupancy. We see it trending around 50 to 60%. Obviously, if there's a public holiday or like summertime, then it's a little different. But across all industries and across all company sizes. And but one thing that we've noticed is that over the past 12 months, that the spontaneous gatherings, so like the anomalies where occupancy is higher than expected, just doubled. And I think that's very different than pre-pandemic for sure, where people had a more regular pattern. Now it's more like spontaneous gatherings and just organized meetups in addition to the hybrid schedules that they have.
Yeah, I mean, you certainly have a lot more of that. Companies actively trying to get large groups back, right, for a ton of understandable reasons, right? But it does kind of make that occupancy calculation a little trickier, right? If you have one day of the week where everyone comes in, you know, we'll get into this a little bit, but yeah, I think, you know, obviously dividing things out by the days of the week probably isn't the most scientific way to understand occupancy. You know, Mahesh, we've talked about this before, but I'm interested to hear. I know you guys are doing quite a big overhaul to a lot of your offices, and just understand what are some of the like larger trends you're playing to, and really how you're understanding the value of your office, right? I think that's one of the trends that we have noticed, is that it's no longer landlords trying to kind of prove the value of the office. It's more them working with occupiers like yourself of, you know, finding the office that works for you, right? And getting the right size and the right type of office. So what are you guys doing right now as far as that's concerned?
Thank you, Franco, and thank you to all my panelists. I'm being educated by just listening to both Jeff and Bernie already, so it's been really interesting. What we're doing, we're segmenting our workforce into three main buckets, and that's mostly driven by either whether they're corporate or in whatever business line they're in. And we're adopting a policy of in-person with purpose. So very similar to what Bernie's talking about, where people come in specifically for a reason. And if you look at our occupancy data, it kind of mirrors that. Jeff had indicated that he's seeing anywhere from 30 to 60% in the pre-pandemic days. I know that that's probably not a word that we will be using in the future, but pre-pandemic days we used I think a 70% rate, 75% rate was fantastic. But right now, I'm seeing occupancy anywhere from 5% all the way up to 30, 40%. In a really peak environment, like Bernie called out, where people are coming in for meetings, I'm seeing occupancy around 60%. And so that's really interesting because the workplace is proving to be a dynamic way of working in the, let's call it the post-pandemic environment. So how do we, as real estate leaders, solve for that? It's proven to be quite challenging, and we're using a lot of reservation systems to kind of maximize how people come into the office, just proving to or re-educating our staff that it's not a 1-to-1 desk ratio anymore. It's sometimes even a 6-to-1 desk ratio. And how do we do a change management both with our landlord and our stakeholders to make sure that it's a successful environment? I had one leader come to me recently and say, we're out of space. Well, I said, how are you out of space? And he said, well, Wednesdays at 2 p.m., I have 50 people in this office that seats 35 and I'm out of space. I'm like, well, what about the rest of the time? Well, the rest of the time we're fine. We don't have any issues. I'm like, well, it doesn't really make sense for us to pull down more real estate so that you can maximize, that use of time. So we solved it other ways, but it's just a new way of thinking about real estate being a much more dynamic environment when previously it never was.
Mm-hmm. And I mean, in your mind, obviously, you're our kind of corporate occupier expert here. Like, does that justify your spend? Like, when you see those kind of numbers, which I think seemed pretty good, but obviously, like when you're like you say, comparing it to pre-pandemic, it might still seem low. But like, are you comfortable with the money you're spending on your real estate?
Yeah, I think our leadership. I mean, obviously, it's for a number of different reasons why we have the real estate, right? It's to establish a market, establish foothold in certain areas. But our leadership is certainly comfortable with that spend on a global basis for sure.
Mm-hmm.
Obviously, would like to maximize it. We want to show what value we're providing the organization, and certainly we're showing that. But it's a moving target, this post-pandemic environment.
I have an interesting question that came in for you, Mahesh, just about willingness of people to use these reservation systems. I know that has been tricky. People don't love apps. People are busy. How does that work? I mean, did people usually go in there and do it?
In a short answer, maybe. It takes people a while to get used to that. And so what we're having to do is have the local administrative assistants kind of help with that until it gets easier. But nobody wants to use something that impedes their way to work, right? And so it is challenging. So, I equate it to an Uber. The reason why at least I use Uber is it's frictionless. I can leave without talking to the driver. I can leave without tipping. It's already preordained everything. So eventually we'd like to get our system down to the Uber type use where it's completely easy to use.
Mm-hmm.
We're not there yet. So yeah, I mean, it's a very valid point.
But I would also say, like, if you set up your network correctly, you may not need some of those applications to check into, like, Wi-Fi, Bluetooth detection. Like, these things are more prevalent now than they were before the pandemic, and a lot more companies are using existing infrastructure to detect presence. That's not to say that you get utilization data from it, but reducing friction for being in the office can be achieved by auto detection. So you don't have, as an employee, as a person working at the company, you don't have to think about, well, I need to check in, I need to reserve this desk, I need to hit the button on the desk to show that I'm here. you can auto detect presence and play that back to people that, you know, maybe are thinking about making a reservation or want to see who else is in the office.
Yeah, we have, where we measure utilization of spaces, we have a good number of customers that also do desk booking. And it's usually in like the 30% range of how many desks are actually booked in a space versus how many people are there. So
Yeah.
it was actually a bigger difference than I expected when we started doing this.
Yeah, and Nick, I'll stick with you here, about these bigger trends. I mean, obviously, like, Jeff was saying, there are these smarter ways now that are even like, completely frictionless, right? These people probably might not even know that they're, being monitored at all, right? So talk to me about how some technology can help, and again, it's not just about who comes in and how long, it's like, where do they sit? Who do they sit with? Right. So how do you think these trends are kind of playing out in the way that people are deploying their technology to understand their workspace?
Yeah, so today OccuSpace measures about 25 million square feet of office space across the US and Canada. And we do it at a neighborhood level of granularity. How many people are in every neighborhood on your floor in your building? And in last quarter, the average occupancy of our customers' office space was 24% during the workday, and the peak was 42%. So it was quite a big difference in room we have to grow. I think a lot of people are kind of looking at that 60 to 70% number as their goal of what they want to get to. And the biggest trend I'm seeing within our customers and hearing about is we now have the data. We feel like we're armed to make decisions and drive changes in employee to desk ratios, go away from assigned desks and really try to, determine at a department or neighborhood level, what should the employee to desk ratio be so we can get back to that 60 to 70% utilization rate, not just to save money, but also to improve the experience in the office. Nobody wants to go into the ghost town office. That's a huge complaint I hear with our customers that I can kind of, relate to is if you go into an office and it's 5-10% utilized, which a lot of our customers are, that's not a very fun environment that makes you want to come back. So those are the big trends I think I'm seeing.
Yeah, and let's stick on that a bit. We have a great question or a great comment here, right? It's like it's hard to get people to reserve seats if there is no scarcity. And so it's kind of like you have a band, right? You need to have, you don't want people elbow to elbow and not be able to find any, place to sit. But you also don't want, like you say, just a ghost town of empty desks. That's not, I think people will just leave or not come back, right? So in your guys' mind, what is that kind of, sweet spot of how much you want? And I guess I'll add on to that question. Now that we see this spikes, the ebbs and flow a lot more, when is it? Are you looking at peak? Are you looking at average? Mahesh, I'm interested in your opinion on this one. When you look at your occupancy, what's your sweet spot?
Yeah, I mean, previously it would have been 70%. Right now, I think what we're doing is we're creating environments that are more dynamic so that it is, as you move throughout your day, you're going to have areas where you can take the private phone call, where you can work collaboratively, where you can work, virtually with folks in. So I would say it's probably, that 40 to 60% range too. But I think just jumping back to what Nick was saying is, you want to know, like, if I'm coming into the office, I want to know, is Franco going to be there, number one? And number two, does Franco have time for me to collaborate with him? Because if he's booked solid, then there's really no sense of me coming in. I'll set up another day to do that. So all of that is interesting. And that data, previously had not been made available. But, I've seen some apps where it is available and it's extremely useful to kind of manage your day around.
So now we're talking about
I think-
actually connecting with the not just the physical booking systems, but with your, G Suite, right? And with your, your Outlook, right? To be able to look into their calendars, and it's like that next level of understanding. Sorry, Jeff, go on. I stepped on you.
No, I was just going to say,
No.
looking forward, I think as if you were to sprinkle some AI over it, it might even come to a suggestion. Hey, Franco, hey, Jeff, you guys are free on Wednesday. Would you consider moving your meeting to Wednesday? So I think that, certainly when I talk to some of these folks in this industry, that's the future of where the trajectory of this technology goes.
Interesting.
I think Mahesh hit on something really interesting earlier on in the conversation, and that is, policies that are informed by the way businesses or teams within businesses operate, right? Like, I think what's been missing up to this point is the data that underlies or underpins decisions around when people should be in the office. So I've talked to executives and leaders at different companies, and I've kind of got this anecdotal feedback that, at the time they made a decision to have people come back into the office 3 days a week, there really was an abundance of data, and they didn't feel like they were going to get the information they needed any sooner, which highlights the importance of occupancy and utilization data to inform those decisions. So, if you ask everybody to come back into the office 3 days a week, that essentially is saying that all functions across your business are the same. They work the same, they interact the same, and we know they don't. It should be lined up to how functions and teams work and at what point in their workflows it makes sense for them to be in the office. And a great example of that is like sales teams. Sales teams probably don't need to be in the office. And I'm thinking about this in terms of like tech companies, for example. They probably don't need to be in the office, 3 days a week, but they do need to be in the office when they're getting ready to roll out a product for a client, or they're setting up, configuring, customizing, because they're working with product and engineering teams to get that done. Like, that helps them as individuals be successful, close a deal. It helps the company close a deal, but there's no good data underpinning this. And I think those types of insights are where occupancy and utilization data become so valuable today.
Yeah, that's a great point. And some of those ebbs and flows, like we're talking about, are natural, right? Counting teams come in quarterly more. There are these times of the year that it would make sense to be more utilized than others.
Franco, can I add something?
Yeah, I'd love to hear it.
Yeah, so in regards to the G Suite comment you made earlier, and I think a good middle ground is to have occupancy schedules in a calendar, so in the productivity tool. We require that in G Suite, so if someone is home or at the office, and it will be specified at which office, so you can look that up. And that overlaying that with the badge data, you can basically analyze, hey, what was planned versus what actually happened, and you might not need that middle ground of booking specific days, unless it's a different office than you actually plan to go to. And the other thing that I see companies struggling if their space gets smaller, but now all of a sudden it's a lot more busy. There's companies that decided to close half their office to make the other half 60% occupant and then make it feel more busy. But companies that frequently run out of space, they also tend to be customers of some of these shared workspace providers or flex providers. So we see that a lot, that because we have clients on both sides, on the corporate side and the flex space world, that corporate offices on demand in those flex spaces become increasingly more popular. And I think one thing that we also didn't talk about is making the data more visible. And a lot of companies make the data available in tools like Slack, so they see like what's going on across the company.
Like, even not to the head of workspace, right? You're talking about making it available to everyone.
To teams, or to people who are frequently at that office, saying, hey, here's like the people who are in today or something like that.
And do you see that happening? I mean, do some of your clients do that, where like this is kind of just easily accessible data?
Yeah. Slack has been one of the most popular integrations simply for that purpose. And it started with data logging tools being not very accessible across the org, but the data needs to be accessed by many other different people now, including office managers or someone who doesn't have access to the IT tools. So making the data visible is also a great tool to show motivation of or busyness at the office.
Absolutely. And Bernie, I'll stay on you for a second. Do you think that we will get to a world, or maybe we're already there, where maybe we don't necessarily need our kind of building centric apps? Everything will just happen through, you go to G Suite, you go to Outlook, you book your appointment, and it'll automatically update your access control and give you everything you need from there?
Yeah, ultimately, I think we are believing in whatever connects people and spaces the best. And typically that's a seamless automated experience, right? So similar how you pay for everything with your phone, you don't have to think much anymore. And I think that's where spaces will be trending towards in the future. The question is just how do you measure intent or plans? You know, like if I have one meeting on the calendar that's on site, automatically probably I want to be booked on site. So it's like just a more automated way that's more in the background. And if you want something changed, then you can intervene if you wanted to.
Mm-hmm. Interesting. And we have a good question that came in here about kind of how do you filter between the people who are just coming in, like, that's very common, come in and have some coffee, meet with a quick meeting, maybe be seen, like I won't say that they have ulterior motives, but they might. But between the people who actually need to go in, sit down, hours and hours of work. Nick, I know you guys obviously track a lot of occupancy, but what does that look like, right? Like, without knowing their intent, I mean, maybe you could ask them a survey before they come, but can you look at, what their historical history is, or, how do you know, or how can you filter that?
Yeah, I mean, almost all of our customers have badge data, and the badge data for a lot of them are in the range that Bernie talked about. 50 to 60% of people are badging in, which if you're going off that metric, you're like, okay, maybe I have 10 or 20% room to optimize my space, but not a ton of room. And then you look at the utilization data and it's like 24 to 40% utilization for the actual space during the workday. And so, unless you have a badge out system as well, it's hard to track that with just badging. With utilization, we don't measure who you are in the space, just, what section, what neighborhood you are, how long you're there, and, how many people are there every minute of the day. So that problem that you mentioned, Carl, is really a huge reason why a lot of people use utilization data sensors, is because the badge data points you in the right direction. But to get to the specific decision around each neighborhood, each department, employee to desk ratios, and the true usage of your space, most people need some kind of utilization data sensor or solution to get that.
And our in desk sensors, I know that was kind of a big thing for a while. I see less and less of them around. Are those still around, or are they getting replaced with maybe more kind of Wi-Fi sensors or better occupancy?
I'd love to get your guys' feedback on this. I'm obviously super biased. I created a whole solution to track neighborhood level because I thought that was the best level of granularity. Our vision is really that at the neighborhood level, you get the data point to drive that employee to desk ratio, which is ultimately how you shrink your portfolio and save money. Desk level, you probably have to pay 3 to 5 times more than what we charge to get that desk level. And there are use cases, there are decisions that you can make with desk level data that you can't make with our data. Our viewpoint is just, for 20% the cost, you can get 80 or 90% of the value in terms of the real ROI with neighborhood level data. And I do think the broader market's getting to that realization too, that desk level isn't as necessary, but I think you guys, I'd love to get your feedback. Jeff, you deal with this a lot. You probably have a lot of customer feedback here.
Yeah, and in my life before Raise at Meta, like it wasn't a cost issue, it was a privacy issue. Desk level monitoring was a privacy issue. And I think that's where I tend to see, even with our clients today, this issue arise is like there's just concerns about desk level monitoring. And that's in North America, forgetting for a moment EMEA, where you've got GDPR and other kind of restrictions around personal information and what you can monitor. So, we see clients defaulting to, even if they're not calling it neighborhoods, you have to create a big enough block of desks and group them together so that you're not revealing, personally identifiable information while you're gathering that data. So I think you're absolutely right.
Yeah, I think the only future trajectory I see is that video monitoring of workplaces could become a source of more granular desk level data, but of course has the privacy implications that you mentioned.
Yeah, and Bernie, obviously, when people use their badge in and out, like I think they understand that that's everyone's going to see that information. I think when it starts to kind of surprise people is to know, oh, we also know exactly where you walk, where you sit, where you're going, how long you stayed there, who you talked to. You talked about this Slack integration and making this data more transparent to the entire organization. Do you think that might help actually, like if people kind of understood better what is being monitored in the office, they might have less privacy concerns and being maybe
Yeah,
kind of blindsided by it.
totally. And I think that's probably to Nick's point. That's why the sensors are anonymous, right? So like they just measure general occupancy and not give you any personal information, while we basically only measure the data that are proactive events at the door, right? So it's similar. We always imagine like a credit card, right? So if a credit card gets used, you know that this is being tracked by the credit card company, and if there's fraud, someone will get alerted and they will call you or something like that. So it's expected. And but like what people don't like, you know, for example, for a while we had to use Bluetooth on iPhones, and Bluetooth has the disadvantage that Apple classifies it as a location service. So people get pop-ups from Apple, hey, the app has been tracking your location, but you know, we don't get access to that data in general. And something like that is being just solved with using Apple Wallet with NFC. You don't have that concern anymore. People are much more happy with it. So I think overall the tendency is towards controlling your own privacy, or at least getting the feeling that you only being watched in the situations where you expect and where it matters.
Mahesh, when you guys like, you know, onboard or start new offices, do you have a education campaign of telling people what you're tracking?
Yeah, I mean, we are still using badge data. We've obviously done an RFP for occupancy data, and we're deploying that shortly. But right now, it's basically badge data, and people are aware that we are using badge data to monitor, you know, attendance. However, we do have the policy of remote work. You can work in the office, you can work remote. There's no mandate for you to come into the office. However, we do check, and we do have, you know, that data available to anybody that wants it. For sure.
Interesting. You know, let's get into maybe what could be some alternatives, right? We've all talked about utilization rates, right? And I think these are kind of, like I said, divided. You divide everything out, or how many people come in a day, a week. What are some maybe better ways to understand occupancy that you know, embody the kind of fluid nature of the office nowadays? Mahesh, I'll stay with you on this one in case you have any.
Yeah, I mean, it's really a different way of thinking that the office can be fluid or dynamic, the way that you've described it, Franco, and that takes a lot of education. Going to like my previous point, a lot of senior leadership doesn't realize that. I mean, they understand that the office is not being used the way it used to be, but they don't understand the fluid nature of the way work is being conducted, you know, in a very hybrid work world. And I think that the key to that is certainly education and then change management. If you have a good change management policy in place, it will help inform the way that folks use the office. And certainly, you know, I guess the one thing that I've learned is that you have to develop that change management policy in a way that people want to be spoken to, and you cater that towards, you know, a baby boomer might want to hear the information differently than a Gen Z or a millennial. And so you have to cater that to make it a successful environment, is the way I've at least experienced success.
How about you, Nick? I mean, I'm interested to see. Obviously, it's so much easier. We can just boil things down to one number. You can, you know, report to C-suite people who are super busy. But you know, now that we have this kind of more complicated understanding, like how do you deliver that information? How do you calculate?
How do we deliver that information to the people actually making decisions with our data, or to the
Yeah, rather than just a number of here's the utilization rate of an office.
It gets really complicated with I mean, our dashboard delivers the data for every neighborhood, and you can query it however you want. That's the easy part. The hard part is, though, you know, how to workplace strategy, how to corporate real estate, or whoever they have helping them make these decisions, have to figure out each department's behaviors, what they want. And we have customers like, okay, cool, we've got this 80-person department. They have an average occupancy of 9 people with a peak of 20. This seems easy. Let's shrink them down to 25. And then that department's like, well, we want to come in once a month with everybody. And then how do you, you know, have this flex space? And tie that to other departments. So it does get really complicated. I think like almost back to the big trends of the space is everybody knows they want to increase their utilization and become more efficient with their office space. All of our customers are experimenting in a lot of different ways of how to do that. On paper, just change your employee to desk ratio sounds great, but then you have the departments that want to come in once a month. You have this department wants to come in 100% Monday and Wednesday. Can we mix them and pair them with a department that wants to come in Tuesday and Thursday? That sounds great. But then they're going to get upset with each other if you don't have, cleaning staff coming in every day, or how are you going to share those workstations? So the implementation gets pretty complicated. And I think right now, a lot of the early adopters and innovators are trying to figure out what is the blueprint that we can apply to all of these departments. But people are still figuring that out right now. I'll say in terms of communication to the employees, be really clear and upfront with what you're going to do and the decisions you're going to make with the data. Where people get in trouble is they come in and they kind of don't tell them, they just deploy sensors to their space, and then the employees find out and they get really upset. You need to say, hey, this is what we're capturing, and this is the decisions we want to make with this data. If you don't use your space at a department level, you might lose your space. That's just the truth of what's going to happen. But if you don't address that up front, you're causing more problems later on. And the last thing, sorry to be a little ranty here, but the last thing is showing, Bernie talked about this a little bit, showing how busy these spaces are in real time is actually really helpful to see. If I'm the employee, now I'm actually getting value from utilization data. I can see I don't have an assigned desk anymore, but I can see every shared workspace neighborhood in my office. How busy is it in real time through maybe my desk booking app or something else? That actually is giving me value now. And that really helps with, the privacy concerns and some of the concerns of losing space.
That's a really interesting idea, Nick. Like, as you were talking through that, I was thinking about FOMO, right? Like, if you can see real-time utilization, you can see people are in the office. You're like, normally you may not go in because you're doing heads down stuff and it's just easier, better to do that at home. But FOMO might kick in and people might come in because it feels like I'm not a part of that thing that's happening right now. It looks like everybody's there. I want to be a part of it.
Yeah, knowing particularly is there too, right? People have work besties, people they want to like be with. It's not all equal, but
it's pretty interesting. One of our customers in the co-working space customized the app to do exactly that. So they have a network of 6 or 8 spaces, and because people roam over like those spaces in a different neighborhood, the members want to see who else is there, and it works for them. There's like no concerns about these other members or tracking me, because everyone sees each other's data, and maybe you can opt out if you don't want to do that. So I think that concept definitely works and is accepted. And I think to Nick's point earlier, like in terms of communication, I think the best companies that are doing this the most optimal way, they have a clear company directive. Here's how we're gonna use the space, right? And as a company, here's the purpose of the office. Is a hub meeting space, or is it like a requirement to be there? And then it trickles down to the team. How do the teams define their purpose in the space? But I think overall, the workplace teams can then leverage that data to enhance that directive and say, hey, look, we saw that this is happening. Like on Wednesday, we had so many people there that was a little too much. So we are changing the office, or like we are providing these more food options. Food is always great. But, like you showing that you do positive impact projects, looking at the data and not just, putting them in a performance review is probably very important.
Interesting. It talked about utilization, but another, I think, antiquated term is this, person to desk gearing ratio, whatever it's called, right? Now that modern offices seem to have more kind of flex third space than anything, right? And so how do we come to terms with, employee to desk ratio seems kind of even conference room space, right? A lot of conferences happen just in a lounge, somewhere. So how does that concept kind of, maybe need to change to better reflect the current state? Jeff, I'm interested in what you have to say here. It's because you obviously coach a lot of people through this change?
Yeah, it's interesting. As you were talking about that, I was thinking about some of the solutions that I'm seeing pop up that help like institutional lenders and landlords manage their portfolio. And it's interesting, like those solutions that I've seen, and there aren't a lot of them. I think it's a relatively new category of product out there that helps optimize around real estate costs. Again, not just for the landlord, but for the institutional lender. So they get every ounce of value out of their asset. Those are all optimized around utilization sensors. Like you can't figure that out without understanding how the spaces are being used. So I don't think we're at a place where we can move past that point in the conversation. Like I just like for our clients, I don't personally think enough of them are investing in this technology. And Nick and Occuspace are a great example where you've got this really great kind of low cost, easy to deploy solution. Like, you know, it used to be that you had to spend, you know, you had to include things like utilization sensors in CapEx when you're building a project because the cost of the implementation was so high. You couldn't just, you know, use it out of OpEx or get it out of OpEx, right? It wasn't that easy. But now the solution costs for capturing that data are coming down substantially. And the data quality is still pretty amazing. Certainly, you know, more than better enough to drive or inform decision making. So like, I just don't think we're beyond that. I mean, you know, what you do with that data and what your tech stack looks like ultimately, are you putting it together with, you know, Zoom meeting room information, if you can use that? Are you putting it together with room reservations or desk booking or other things? That's an open conversation that I think every company's having right now. But I just don't see enough of our clients investing in utilization technology to get the real data, the answers that they need to inform decisions.
Mhm. How about anybody else? You have anything to say about, you know, rethinking what we mean by, you know, desk ratios and conference room sizes with the surge in you know, this third space, right? That people again do a lot of their work from a little lounge area. They don't necessarily need a desk or a conference space.
I mean, what we're seeing is that people really like the 4 to 6 person conference room. People also really like when they feel empowered on the other side of the screen. So everybody that we're speaking to here is virtual, and we are looking to develop more solutions that empower and give currency to the folks on the other side of the screen so that they have an active voice in the conversation. Um, that's been harder to develop a solution than we intended, but we're trying to get there. So, I mean, I guess what I'm saying is I will, if I'm having a conversation with you, Franco, and you're in person, I'll gravitate to you. I'll naturally, you know, tend to speak to you rather than Jeff, Bernie, Nick, or other folks that are virtual. And so how do we flip the script on that? And that's what we're really pushing towards, that we're working towards, make it a more equitable environment.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I know that a lot of the new conference tech has, you know, where it'll bring people's faces in and give everyone kind of equal share of the screen. But I think human nature is, yeah, you're probably going to interact more with someone who's sitting right next to you than the little face in the collage of screens.
Yes.
And unfortunately, like that tech is really valuable from an equity perspective, but you know, it's relatively new and it's pretty costly to deploy too. So we see a few clients using that, but not a lot because the investment up front is still pretty substantial. But I'm optimistic that over time, as those systems become more prevalent and the demand increases, the cost will come down. Sorry, Bernie.
Yeah, I agree with that. And not everyone's used to it, and not everyone wants to do a training how to use a professional, you know, conference room webinar. But I think one probably the most favorite data point that we haven't talked about yet that I remember is like when you sit in the same office, you're 4 times more likely to collaborate than when you're remote. So I think it's just, and it's hard to measure impact of that. It's also, you know, of course, downside, you get distracted more, but I think if you imagine just the other way around, like all the little things you send a Slack message for, or like you do a quick Zoom call for 15 minutes at the office, you can probably do that in 2 minutes. In person, so much easier.
Yeah, and I'm interested to hear from you, Bernie, too. Obviously, that for us to really understand how conferences are being conducted in the office, we need to understand how many people are, in there remotely, right? So now we're talking about what you were saying before is not only you have to connect with the G Suites and the Outlooks, you have to bring their data in, right? I mean, do you guys do stuff like that where you can maybe report like, hey, this conference room had 4 people that were there and 6 people that were there virtually?
We see, well, generally, we can report on heat maps. So like which doors have been the most popular, right? So you can maybe see trends over all the conference rooms that that have been most accessed. So you can like generally have an idea of what's going on. But we have companies using their data teams outside of real estate, just the general data teams, to pull and overlay all sorts of different data. For example, workday data with batch data, and this would be like, let's say you use Zoom like we use here, Zoom data with batch data. So I think there's really creative ways to show the trends in especially in meeting rooms. Because it's more collaborative, and typically there's multiple people on it, and it's such a defined event that everyone is on a calendar invite, so it can typically analyze it well. But yeah, we haven't done it ourselves, but I think companies have definitely tried various things in that direction.
Yeah, I think that, with all the new kind of smart whiteboards and, really, really good conference, like I could see where that could be a benefit of the office. Like, hey, people like to conduct their meetings from here. It's better than when they're sitting at home on their, little laptop. So, bringing that data in, I think could prove the value of the office in a way that, we didn't really consider before, right? Like that was never a consideration. I'm also interested in just talking a bit about the kind of growing personas that are interested in the office, right? I know previously it was, head of workplace, head of real estate, maybe the CFO, right? Because they want to know how much they're spending on the lease. And now I hear more and more that office lease negotiations include HR, right? All the C-suite, like all of the kind of top, because it is such an important decision. And Mahesh, maybe like, how often do you kind of collaborate with these, people that you maybe not have before? And how does that look, right? You guys don't really speak the same language always, like they have kind of competing priorities. So how does that work?
Yeah, it's an important question and a good question. And I think that, a really successful individual in a real estate organization is part therapist and part finance and part, engineer. So it's a lot of personalities to take to get to that, to get to a successful outcome. So yeah, I've reported to head of HR, I've reported to CFO, I've reported to other various operations people. So a lot of people are interested in what the place looks like. A lot of people are interested in where you find the real estate. And, when we get our lease approval, we're not necessarily going to the head of HR, but the head of HR really is keen on understanding how you're fitting it out. What amenities are adjacent to the facility? Are you putting it in a food desert? Are there places for people to go and get a bite to eat? Is parking astronomically expensive? Are you close to a light rail? These are all things that other folks other than the CFO are wanting to know, and it's becoming something that is much more transparent to the entire C-suite, not just the CFO.
I feel like it's part of that why everybody cares about it so much more now is because it's just not as straightforward as it used to be. It used to be, hey, everybody's going to come in 5 days a week.
There's no decision.
Like if you want to get paid, you're coming in, like that's it. And so it made all of those things simple. And now if you're talking about shared workspaces, now it's like, whoa, is my department going to change how we have to do things? Now I want to be involved in this decision. Or if you're in the real estate and HR side, now we want to attract people to come in. So the food and the convenience and the parking, like we have to work to make all of this really easy and attractive for our employees just to get them in the office. So yeah, I just to kind of reiterate that, I think it's become such a more complicated decision now where everybody's being affected a little bit more, so they all want to have a say. Before, when it was just, hey, everybody gets a desk for the number of employees you have, cool, why do I need to be involved in that decision?
Yeah, and it's interesting, like coming from the end user side, like building the justification for investment in new office space. Like to your point, Mahesh, you know, you had all of these stakeholders that each speak a different language, each are looking at having impact within their functional area. Like that decision making was sometimes challenging when we had the checklist and everything, you know, like people were just coming in 5 days a week and everyone was assigned one-to-one. It was challenging then. Now it's like for a lot of our clients, like they're asking, well, what are the variables? Like they think they know like core, you know, metrics and KPIs that they need to be planning to and delivering on, but like all of that stuff got tossed up into the air. And so layer on top of that a kind of bigger functional team in the decision-making process that, you know, have different speak different languages and are expecting different outcomes and impacts, and how you influence and drive the justification for investment is challenging. Like again, like I still remain kind of shocked that some of our clients don't have the data I think is necessary to inform some of these decisions that make these conversations internally a lot easier.
I think something interesting that people usually get surprised by is our occupancy index also includes Europe and Asia, and Europe in average on occupancy rates is about 10% higher than US. And also in the US, I think there's verticals that could be done remotely that have almost 100% occupancy. For example, financial services. And everyone goes to the office. It's not even a question, right? And it's normal. And I think what we are seeing is like getting used to the way back, and it just happens to take a while. And some tech companies might decide that it needs destination spaces to get them back. But over time, people just, you know, ultimately gravitate back to in person in whatever form. But I think our job is it to make it easy and more fun, or like more productive than they expected it to be.
And one of the things fascinating to me is how, you know, it's like the push and pull, right? It's top down. Is it this, you know, the kind of executives telling everybody, or is it the workers, right? The ones actually doing it saying, no, this is what we want. And what do you guys think about when you're building out a new space or you're redeveloping a space? Like, how much do you take the employee opinions into consideration? Obviously, like, you know, they're important, but they might tell you, oh, we don't want an office at all. Like, you know, I just want to work from a beach somewhere, right? So, you know, obviously the C-suites are the ones that are accountable for all of, you know, the benefits or the negative impact of the office. Mahesh, what do you guys, when you're redesigning, do you do surveys, or is that just, you know, not as important as?
Yeah, I mean, you know, when we did our corporate headquarters, we did spend a lot of time with the employees, and we talked to them extensively about what would it take, and keep in mind the context of a hybrid environment. So there was no need for the employees to come in. However, if they did want to come in, what would you guys like to see? And so we spent a lot of time doing town halls, and not even just electronic surveys, but I actually spoke to a lot of people, a lot of senior leaders, like, what would you guys want to see in a new environment? And it all boiled down to, and I think, you know, some of the folks here on the panel have heard it, you know, natural light, access to amenities, access to a fun place, and access to a collaborative environment. So those are like the top 3 or 4 things that people wanted to see. And so we're developing that. I've seen that employee engagement has been very high. There's been a lot of appetite to see the new place. It remains to be seen after 6 months if it will be still the bright shining star that it is right now in incubation. But I have a feeling that it will be, because I think that people do like to congregate. We're social animals. We want to do it in person rather than virtual.
Anybody else? What do you guys think about?
I was just going to double click, Mahesh, on what you said about employee feedback. Like, you know, the data that we get from systems, you know, utilization or badge data or meeting room booking, it's all very interesting, informative, kind of space related. But like the employee perspective piece, it's invaluable. Like if you think about creating a justification for investment in making some change to workplace experience, real estate, it has to be underpinned by what's going to benefit the people that are occupying and using the space. And so that kind of data allows you then to prioritize your investment, right? It tells you pretty empirically, here's what our people expect from these spaces. Here's what they need to be productive. Like I think, you know, a lot of our clients use pulse survey data, and generally that's asking questions about, you know, how do you feel about the company? How do you feel about leadership, the direction we're taking? But there's always, we find a lot of good insights included in open-ended responses to those questions. Like that stuff is a gold mine for helping get alignment around how we prioritize capital and where we deploy capital to improve experience.
Mhm.
Yeah.
And Nick, you guys like obviously report to these companies, but like you're like you said, you're reporting about the space. Like, how do you think that gets kind of parsed with the employee feeling about it?
Yeah, I think it has to be balanced hand in hand of what are employees doing with the existing spaces. You can gain a lot of insights. What do they use today? What do they not use today? Space types, furniture types, amenity types. That's really valuable, but you do have to also go to them and hear directly from them and balance that in with your kind of new design ideas, because ultimately I think the 330-300 rule is might be slightly outdated now. Maybe it's inflated a little bit, but productivity, like the employee cost of the $300 per square foot in that rule, and salaries and employee cost is 10x bigger than the 30, the real estate and operational expenses in that. So if you're going to do something that hurts the 300, it's going to cost you a lot more money than improving, you know, efficiency of your space. Like we don't want a customer to shave their real estate costs by 20 or 30% if it comes at the expense of a 10% drop in productivity and experience of the employees. So you have to keep that employee pulse, you know, really tied to what you're going to do.
And just real quickly, Bernie, I wanted to bring you in because, you know, how does this change by region, right? Like obviously in the US, we like, you know, survey employees. Like I'm guessing in Asia, countries that maybe have more like a, you know, top-down hierarchical culture, they're maybe less interested. Do you see that happening less in other parts of the world?
Yeah, we only looked at US or North America, Europe, and Asia. But even within, we have some new data in the works where, for example, you see that people moved away a little bit further from their normal workplace. And so sometimes they start booking conference rooms or meeting rooms in flex spaces in the middle of the way. So there's like basically new behaviors in terms of like what is a workplace, right? So if a one day co-working pass is expensible, and maybe that's like what the company is incentivizing as well, then that's fine. And it's just the company's goal of like analyzing and like understanding that behavior and why does it happen, and what is our idea of the workplace? Why do they book the conference room there and not at my work? Well, because it's further away. So in terms of future hiring, we might require people to live in a certain distance, right? Or something like that. So I think overall, for sure, there's metro dynamics. There's also suburban dynamics. There's like difference between states in the US, and there's global differences. So that's very interesting to look at, especially if you have like a global footprint of offices.
Yeah,
There's
absolutely.
also different cultures.
Yeah, I mean, in between teams, right? Salespeople and accountants, right? They're definitely different teams. Well, this has been great. We're approaching the end here. I just want to remind everybody that if they would like to be introduced to any of the panelists, they can reach out to me. It's Franco, Franco, at propmoto.com. I'd be happy to make the intro. This has been really interesting, and I appreciate all of you for joining. Everybody hopefully learned a little bit, and thank you all for your great questions. We always appreciate those coming in. So Jeff, Bernie, Nick, Mahesh, thank you guys so much, and have a great day.
Thank you so much.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye now.